Hello and welcome back to the eighth episode of the Marzano's Learning and Teaching Strategies. Again, this is Edward. So let's just have a quick recap of everything that we've learned so far. We have identifying similarities and differences, summarizing and note taking, reinforcing effort and providing recognition, homework and practice, non linguistic representations, cooperative learning, setting objectives and providing feedback. And second to the last would have to be generate and testing hypothesis. Okay, so this is what we are going to learn today. So thank you again for um, subscribing to this series. We've we are almost done actually. We have after this we have one more, and hopefully you'll be able to apply this to your class, or if you're a student to your um, school. Now let's look at what Marzano has to say about generating and testing hypotheses. So according to him, there are tasks that will require students to generate and test hypotheses. And what are those things? Okay, if they need to solve a problem, definitely they need to use and do hypothesis. If they are to make an invention of something, of course they need to. If they have to make a decision, yeah, of course, decision making is really, really hard thing to do. So having an hypothesis is going to help the student. Experimental investigations and system analysis are two other things. So when we do a hypothesis, it actually requires higher order thinking, and students should also be able to retain information at the same time applying logic. So this is not a very easy task to do, but once a student mastered or probably know already how to apply or use this technique, then most definitely any problems mentioned here they will be able to solve. But let's talk about hypothesis. What is a hypothesis? Okay, according to uh, the studies, hypothesis is a prediction of some sort regarding the possible outcomes of a study. So we use the term study because we're gonna talk about we're talking about different kinds of problems, different kinds of fields. So it's not just for, let's say, science. It can be used in math, English as well. But we are all familiar with hypothesis in science because most of the time we need to predict what possible outcomes of an experiment will be. And so this is very, very useful in science class. So we all probably have experienced this doing or writing hypothesis when we were in high school, and we are conducting a science experiment. But it doesn't end there. It can be applied in almost everything, like what Marzano mentioned in the previous page. So let's talk about generating a hypothesis. How do we do this? Okay. Um, of course, we start with vague and general ideas. Okay. And how do we do that? We do that by first doing initial observations and then by searching for existing research literature. Of course, if you want to predict an outcome of a particular study, you cannot do that if somebody has already done it. So you have to make sure that what you're going to do is something new and something that applies to you. So for college students, this is useful in making thesis because they want to make sure that their study that they will conduct hasn't been written yet and they are the original writer of this. So it will work if your study can be applied, or if your study focuses on more specific area. Okay, It doesn't have to be, for example, why the sun revolves around a particular galaxy, or why planets revolve around the sun, things like this, because we already have an answer to this. And probably there are more people who can do a better research on that as they have the equipment. But for students, it could be around their community or their personal lives, and so that can make it original. Now that they have initial observations, they have taken note of this. They also have discovered that this particular study is original. That's the time that they will state the problem. Okay, what is my problem? What do I need to solve? Right? And once they have done that, that's the time that they will try to do their hypothesis. What is the prediction? Okay, if I were to do this study or experiment, what will be the prediction? What will be the result? And that's how you generate your hypothesis. But of course, it will not be reliable if you will not test it. And so, once you have formulated your hypothesis, you will now have to collect data on how you're gonna solve your problem, and then you analyze this data to test your hypothesis, and then finally you draw conclusions. So this can apply for mostly science classes, but like what he said, it can be used in problem solving. Okay, so teachers can do experiments and or probably ask questions and apply the hypothesis technique in order for us to get conclusions from the students. So, if a student is going to do a hypothesis, there is actually a very, or there are things that we need to consider. Okay? What makes a good hypothesis? One, it should be a solid question. What do you need to ask? It shouldn't be very vague. As much as possible, provide detail that someone hasn't provided yet, right? At the same time, it you should have a very good background research. Okay? You cannot answer a question if you didn't do your research. Otherwise, you will just be answering questions from the research papers that were already made. And we want to avoid that. As much as possible, if you have resources, use them and apply them, and that will make your research solid, right? Third one, make sure it's testable. You cannot test something if you don't have the equipment or the capability to do it. For example, you want to test let's say, the atmosphere in Pluto. Let's say you don't have any information about that. How are you going to test that, right? There's no way. So it's going to be hard to prove your conclusion. And so it's much better if what your experiment or study is going to be done on Earth. It's going to be here in your community or at home, something that you can do yourself. And then, fourth one, you should have independent and dependent variables. Okay, so meaning you should have experiments that can be tested. Okay, you should have a reference to everything that you do in order for you to ensure that what you're testing is measurable. Okay, so that actually wraps up our generating and testing hypothesis. So thank you so much for watching this video, and we're gonna move on to the last video, which is questions, cues, and advanced organizer. Thank you so much. Goodbye.